Gwen flashed a mysterious smile. That's a good question. The 5 erudites are powerful martial artists, but why didn't they step in when the country was being threatened? Luther leaned forward, afraid to miss out on any details. The 5 erudites were legendary existences. If they were still around, their organization would have been destroyed a long time ago. It's because 4 of them were heavily injured, and 1 was imprisoned. Luther was expecting any answer but that. What are you talking about? They're the strongest martial artists in the U.S. Who would be capable of injuring them and putting them in jail? And which prison could contain people like them? He was in the middle of another rant when Gwen raised her hand to silence him. Calm down and listen to me. It's true that their martial arts are extraordinary. No martial artist has ever come close to their cultivation. But have you ever wondered what would happen if they fought each other? Luther's eyes widened. He'd never considered the possibility. Think about it. The only people who could harm them were themselves. No one else could have made them suffer any losses. Luther fell into deep thought. But why were they against each other? Internal strife wouldn't benefit anyone. It would just be mass destruction. With their unparalleled martial arts, shouldn't they have been friends and worked with the country together? The truth is, they used to be strangers, even when they were at the peak of their fame. They would have passed by each other on the streets without knowing that they were the 5 erudites. No one knows their real names, and not all of them were from the U.S. People knew them as Erwin, Vito, Sal, Norman, and Charles. Erwin's origins are unknown. They say he achieved his level of martial arts from an exotic island overseas. Vito is from the western region of the U.S. He rarely left his hometown and spent all of his time mastering his martial arts. He claimed he was invincible, but everyone called him crazy. Sal was from a royal family from a country in the south. He was the heir to the throne, but he wasn't interested because he was obsessed with martial arts. Norman was the leader of the largest crime syndicate in the U.S. And lastly, Charles was a general in our country's military. He mastered most of the well-known martial arts in less than 10 years. If he was still around, the former commander, current commander, and the sovereign wouldn't be a match for him. Luther listened quietly. While he was familiar with the 5 erudites, he had never heard of their origins. Their martial arts were on par with one another, Gwen went on to explain. Each of them settled down in a different region of the United States' Central Plains. They were far away from each other, and they wouldn't have crossed paths if it weren't for one incident that changed everything. Vito was known as a lunatic, and he believed his martial arts were superior to the rest of the erudites. He wanted to challenge them to prove that he was the strongest martial artist in the country. At that time, Vito had never lost a battle, and he was confident that he could win. Right before he was about to set off, he found out that his wife was pregnant. He decided to temporarily put his plans on hold to take care of her. When the U.S. found out he planned to challenge the other 4 erudites, they thought he would try to overthrow the government. They killed his wife, and their unborn child died with her. Vito was overcome with anger, and he initiated a bloody massacre across the country. He started with the western region and headed north, planning to slaughter his way to Annapolis. The country sent Sal to stop him, but after he failed, they sent the remaining erudites to restrain Vito together. Luther was impatient. What happened in the end? Did Vito lose? No, he was unstoppable. The country had to resort to sending out several hundred troops and setting up all sorts of traps to capture him. That's it? Luther asked incredulously. The country sent out 4 of the erudites and hundreds of thousands of troops only to capture him? It's not that easy to kill him. He wasn't even injured when he was captured. If the country didn't go all out, they wouldn't have been able to restrain him at all. What about the other 4 erudites? They sustained heavy injuries from their fight with Vito, Gwen replied. He destroyed their meridians and made it impossible for them to practice martial arts again. They disappeared from the public's eye, and they're still missing to this day. Anyway, after Vito was in the country's custody, their only option was to lock him up in prison. Luther was having a hard time processing the incredible story. Vito had the strength to hold his own against 4 of the erudites, and he was so strong that the country couldn't kill him even after they captured him. Vito's claims that he was invincible didn't sound like an exaggeration. I can't make sense of it. The U.S. wouldn't kill off an innocent civilian, especially not a woman who was pregnant. Why did they do that? When Vito announced his plan to challenge the other 4 erudites, the country saw him as a potential threat. They tried to negotiate with him and proposed to unite the 5 of them, but he rejected them. That's why they killed his wife? Yes, the country couldn't do anything to Vito. They kidnapped his wife to threaten him, but they accidentally killed her. He was enraged and went on a rampage. The U.S. deserved it. Is Vito still locked up in prison? He is, Gwen said. 4 of the erudites have gone missing, and his wife is dead. Even if he did break out of prison, he has nothing to live for. Luther let out a sigh. What a shame. He has a long life ahead of him. It's a waste to spend the rest of his life in prison. Now that I've given you a background, let's get to the main point. Our boss just left to release him from prison. He did? Does he want Vito to start another massacre? Gwen let out a laugh. That's right. Vito is more dangerous than the Alliance. If he gets out, the country will be overrun with panic. Unfortunately, the Sovereign was killed in Cadus. If he were still around, he could have stopped Vito for a short period of time. From what they've seen of the Sovereign, he wasn't as skilled as Vito, but he still was a talented martial artist. He'd faced off against 2 million enemies on his own before the missile hit the mountain. Luther had a revelation. Has the boss been planning this since the transatlantic summit? The Sovereign was the biggest threat to our operation. After getting rid of him, he would release Vito and no one would be able to stop him. Gwen's eyes shone with admiration. That's why I told you his plan is brilliant. The U.S. will never see it coming. But the country went through so much trouble to capture him. Why would they release him again? They don't know about it. Vito wasn't locked up in the U.S. Gwen chuckled at the shocked expression on Luther's face. Strange, right? But it's because after the 4 erudites were injured, there was no one left to keep him in check. None of the prisons here have the means to restrain him. If he broke out, that would be the end. Then, where was he imprisoned? The Abyssal Penitentiary. Isn't that the mysterious prison located at the bottom of the sea? Gwen smiled. You guessed right. It was constructed 500 years ago, and it took a century to build it. It required a large amount of resources and manpower. Only the most dangerous criminals are locked up in there. Once they go in, they never come out. It's like a death sentence. They're not killed, but that place will become their grave. Not a single prisoner has escaped since the prison was built. That's how secure it is. Not even Vito? Luther asked. That's right. The Abyssal Penitentiary is impregnable. That's why the U.S. chose to imprison Vito there. There's no way for him to get out. Then how is the boss going to release him? I'm not sure about that either. I just know he paid a high price, and he made an agreement with the warden to get Vito out. How much did he pay? Gwen didn't know either. She cleared her throat and said, You're asking too many questions. Our boss is the leader of our organization for a reason. None of the members can compare to him, including you and me. Our boss is amazing, Luther praised. He's toying with the U.S. He's the only one who could have gotten Vito out. I'm looking forward to the country's reaction. Gwen smirked. Now that you mention it, I'm also looking forward to it. The other 4 erudites were long gone. The Sovereign is dead, and the former and current commanders are no match for Vito. I'd like to see how the country plans to defend against him this time. The leader of Vindictus, Odin, was on a ship sailing across the vast ocean. His destination was the Abyssal Penitentiary. He stood on the deck with a map in his hands. He was almost there. The location of the prison wasn't charted on the map. It was located at the bottom of the sea. After braving the ocean for days, Odin finally made it. The Abyssal Penitentiary was a creepy place, even for the most courageous adventurers. They'd rather go tomb raiding, venture into the wilderness, or go to space than come here. 500 years ago, hundreds of billions of dollars were spent, and more than 10 million people were needed to build the prison. It was a difficult construction because it was at the bottom of the sea. It had been built out of the world's toughest waterproof material. It was so sturdy that no natural disaster, including tsunamis and earthquakes, could knock it down. 100,000 elite soldiers guarded the prison. There were rumors that most of them were at the Grandmaster realm or higher. A cutting-edge security system had also been set up. An aircraft carrier roamed the skies above where the prison was located all year round. Not even Warhawk's superior satellite system had been able to detect its existence. The prison had been accepting criminals since it was built. Not a single one had been able to escape. The stringent security extended to the classification system of the prisoners. There were a total of 7 tiers that corresponded to the level of threat, and there were a select number of floors dedicated to prisoners of each tier. Those who posed the least risk were at the top, while the most dangerous were locked up at the bottom. S tier represented the lowest potential threat. These prisoners were internationally wanted criminals. SS tier prisoners had the potential to threaten a country. As for prisoners in the SSS tier, they could cause a world war. There were fewer prisoners starting with the 4th tier. Not only did they have the potential to cause a world war, there was a risk that they would bring disaster to the world. There were usually only 1 or 2 of these criminals out of dozens of countries, but when they were rounded up, their numbers accounted to over 100. On the floors reserved for the 5th and 6th tiers, the cells were empty. Criminals of these tiers had yet to be imprisoned here. There was only one prisoner locked up at the bottommost cell. It was Vito, and he had been labeled with the highest tier of potential risk. He was the only one who'd ever been placed in this category. At this moment, Vito was sitting cross-legged at the center of the cell. He hadn't been handcuffed because any kind of restraints were only decorations to him. When Vito was first brought to the Abyssal Penitentiary, the prisoners at the 4th tier wanted to show him who was in control. But the moment they saw him, the murderous look in his eyes forced them to avoid meeting his gaze. A guard went down to the cell and opened the lock. "Mr. Vito, you can leave now." Vito opened his eyes and nodded. He stood up and walked out of the cell. Ever since the prison had been built, there had been no record of any prisoner being permitted to leave. Vito was the first, but it wasn't his first time leaving. The cell at the bottom of the prison had the highest level of security, but it wasn't enough to trap him. He'd always had the freedom to wander the floors. He'd left the prison several times for a change of scenery, but he always came back. Today, Vito would leave permanently. As he ascended the spiral staircase, the guards followed him from behind. The prisoners bid him farewell as he passed each floor. He gave them a slight nod in return, but he likely wouldn't remember them. They were insignificant and forgettable. The warden's office was located on the 1st level. He'd gathered the SSS tier prisoners to wait for Vito and send him off. When Vito walked in, the air turned frigid and his chilling gaze swept over them. It took a minute for them to compose themselves before the first prisoner scrambled to speak. He offered Vito an assassin and mercenary organization. Before being imprisoned here, they had all been dangerous criminals who the world feared. But now that Vito stood before them, they didn't hesitate to hand over their life's work. Vito didn't reject the gifts. He accepted them one by one. The last prisoner to squeeze through the crowd was an elderly man. He held out a black card that contained half his fortune. He used to be one of the wealthiest people in the world, and he wanted to share half of his wealth with Vito. Vito accepted the black card without hesitation. He wasn't materialistic, and he would normally have no interest in these kind of gifts, but they would come in handy now that he was being released. During his time in prison, he'd been thinking about how to take revenge on the U.S. Vindictus had given him the opportunity to make this possible. That was when Vito understood that even though he was strong and had nothing to fear, he still hadn't been able to protect his wife. The biggest reason was that he worked alone. It was easy for his enemies to target him. It was also because of this reason that he was captured when the U.S. sent out all their forces to restrain him. If Vito had the organizations and wealth he'd been given now, he wouldn't have lost his beloved wife and their unborn child. It would have been impossible for the U.S. to ever capture him. The warden sat behind his desk, quietly watching the SSS tier prisoners hand over their parting gifts to Vito. The warden used to be the highest authority at the prison, but after Vito arrived, the authority had gone to him. Vito had always been a cooperative prisoner. He never caused trouble, but the warden knew that if he wanted to leave, no one could stop him. Vito's martial arts had only grown stronger while he was in prison. He could have overthrown the hierarchy and taken control of the prison himself, but he didn't. The only reason he remained in prison was to bide his time and wait for an opportunity to leave permanently without breaking any rules. And today, the opportunity had come. The leader of Vindictus had negotiated an agreement with the warden that involved releasing Vito from prison. The warden knew that the prison's reputation would be damaged if he let Vito go, but he had no choice because he'd never had any control over him. Moreover, they would receive significant benefits from this deal, so why not? The warden signed a document to officially release Vito from the prison and instructed the guards to open the gates. In the past, the gates had been open to receive prisoners, but today, a prisoner would be released for the first time since the prison was built. On the surface, Odin was peering over the railing at the water below. There were 10 warships behind him and numerous helicopters circling the skies above. He'd been waiting for an hour, but he didn't complain. He would be willing to wait for another 10 hours for Vito. The waves shifted into a whirlpool. It spun rapidly, drawing in the ship that Odin was on. His subordinates began to panic. "Calm down. That has to be Vito. He's coming to the surface." A moment later, a man appeared at the center of the vortex, standing on top of the water. Odin introduced himself. "Congratulations on your release, Mr. Vito. I'm Odin, the leader of Vindictus." Vito leaped onto the ship and landed next to him. "You've done well, Odin. It's been more than 100 years. I've been waiting for this day for a very long time. The person I used to be was weak, but now I've learned from my past mistakes. There is strength in numbers that I can't achieve on my own." Hearing Vito say that he wasn't capable enough on his own made Odin want to laugh. If Vito was weak, then what did that make everyone else? "Our organization is at your disposal," Odin offered. Vito nodded and looked out over the ocean. His thoughts drifted to the incident over a century ago. More than 100 years have passed. I haven't been keeping track of the world outside the prison. How are the other 4 erudites doing? You may not know this, but they were seriously injured after they fought with you. They've gone missing. Odin paused before adding, "But you don't have to worry about them. I heard they're no longer capable of martial arts." Vito glanced at him. "Did you think I was afraid of them? Even if they were in peak condition, what could they do to me? I've been training during my time in prison. My cultivation has accumulated for the past century. I'm much stronger than I used to be." Odin was thrilled to hear that. The heavens were on his side. He didn't know how strong Vito had become, but it was safe to say that no one in the U.S. would be capable of fighting on par with him. "That's great to hear, but we should be cautious. The country is vast, and the officials still have tricks up their sleeves. They always have a backup plan. Take the Sovereign, for example. No one knows where he comes from. There could be more just like him." "The Sovereign? What has he done to deserve that title?" Odin was about to introduce the Divine Sovereign, but he decided not to. The battle at Cadus was astounding, but the Sovereign was lacking compared to Vito. He wasn't worth mentioning, and he was already dead. "He can't be compared to you, Mr. Vito." "Is that so?" Vito asked. "The other 4 erudites didn't come close to defeating me. I doubt the Sovereign's capable of that." Odin was so caught up in admiring Vito's strength that he'd forgotten who he was talking to. "Vindictus was planning our next operation with you in mind. With you at the helm, the country will meet its end before you know it." Vito shot him a warning look. "Are you telling me what to do? Just because you struck a deal with the warden and got me out of prison doesn't mean I'll be grateful to you and volunteer to be your tool." They were in the middle of the ocean, and the sea breeze was cool and refreshing. But when Vito's aura swept over the water, the air turned oppressive and stifling. Odin struggled to breathe. He was taken aback by the murderous look in Vito's gaze. "I wouldn't dream of it." "It's good that you know. I'll get my revenge in my own way. I don't need you or anyone else to guide me. Do you understand?" "Understood," Odin said quickly. "It would be best if you remembered that. From now on, your organization, including you, will answer to me." "Yes, sir." Odin was reluctant, but he had no choice but to go along with it. Vito alone could dismantle his organization. Odin had brought 10 subordinates with him, and one of them wasn't pleased to see Vito treating their boss so disrespectfully. "Do you not know who's standing in front of you? Our boss is the leader of Vindictus. Even Adler Robinson has been courteous to him. Who do you think you are?" The subordinate who'd just spoken was the second-ranked guard of Vindictus. His high position reflected his martial arts skills. Vito's reputation had spread far and wide, but his glorious era had taken place more than a century ago. Aside from the core members of Vindictus, like Odin, Gwen, and Luther, there weren't that many members who were familiar with how strong the five erudites really were. The second-ranked guard had always believed that the story of the five erudites was exaggerated rumors that overstated their fearsome reputation, when in reality, their true strength didn't live up to their name. Vito looked him in the eye. "Are you dissatisfied?" The guard fearlessly made eye contact. "That's not the only thing. I'm dissatisfied with you." "Looks like I've been locked up for too long. People outside have forgotten about me." Vito closed the distance between them in a split second and punched a hole through the guard's abdomen. Blood sprayed onto the deck as the guard fell overboard and disappeared into the depths of the ocean. Odin's remaining 9 subordinates took a cautious step back, unnerved by how fast Vito had wiped the floor with the second-ranked guard of Vindictus. Even though he was only ranked second, he'd mastered defensive techniques to strengthen his body. He could survive being hit directly by a cannon. He was well known in the organization as an impregnable fortress, but Vito had killed him with one strike. No one had seen Vito's movements clearly. One second he was talking, and then the next he'd thrown the guard overboard. Vito's sharp gaze swept over Odin's remaining subordinates. Who else isn't convinced? They shivered from the chill look in his eyes. They swallowed their pride and lowered their heads. They didn't have the confidence to exchange even a single blow with him. Instead of grieving over the loss of a capable subordinate, Odin's eyes were gleaming. "Mr. Vito, Vindictus will be under your command. We'll carry out your orders unconditionally." Vito nodded. "Good answer." "What's your plan?" Odin asked. He'd wanted to use Vito as a chess piece, but this turn of events wasn't bad either. Vito had the ability to ruin the country from the inside out, and this was Vindictus's ultimate goal. "That's none of your business," Vito said. "I don't need to report to you. Go back and wait for my instructions. When I need you, I'll let you know. Move out immediately when you receive my message." "Yes, sir," Odin replied respectfully. "Prepare a raft for me," Vito instructed. "After that, leave with the ships and helicopters." Odin ordered his subordinates to place a raft on the water. Vito leaped overboard and landed on the raft. He propelled it forward with his martial arts like it was a motorboat. Odin and his subordinates had never seen anything like it. "Mr. Odin, what's our next step?" "Didn't you hear what he said?" Odin berated. "There's only one thing for us to do, and that is to wait." No one knew where Vito went after leaving the Abyssal Penitentiary, but the prisoners were filled with anticipation because he'd accepted the gifts from the prisoners at the 3rd tier before setting off. Vito had one goal in mind. He would visit the organizations he'd been given to consolidate them under his leadership. His plans were confidential, and no one knew he'd been released. The prison and Vindictus kept this information on the down low. After the ceremony for the aristocrats' unification ended, Stephen sped up the investigation on Vindictus. They proceeded at a much faster pace with the assistance of the aristocratic families. He didn't think it would take long before Vindictus revealed themselves, but just as he closed in on their organization, they disappeared. There was no trace of them. It was like they'd vanished into thin air. Stephen gathered the 4 guardians for a meeting. "Any new leads on Vindictus?" "Not yet," Aston replied. "They've been unusually quiet." "This doesn't make any sense. Now that the Sovereign is dead, they have the upper hand. Shouldn't they be taking advantage of this opportunity to launch a big attack on the country?" "I was thinking the same thing. They haven't made any moves since then. It's like they disappeared. I don't know what they're up to." Stephen thought about it. This unnatural silence reminded him of how suddenly the U.S. was thrown into war back then, and how a period of peace had followed before Devil Hall's comeback. This was the silence before the storm. "I think they're plotting a big operation in secret. It's their final one. Once they succeed, They'll retire and leave the country to watch our downfall from a distance." The four guardians exchanged nervous glances. Aston frowned. That just might be the case. After the battle in Cadiz, Adler Robinson rewarded Vindictus with more than 10 islands. He even gave them new identities as citizens of Warhawk. They have nothing to fear. "We have to stop them," Stephen said. "If this is their final operation, then it has to be on a larger scale. It'll take place here in the country." Neither the war with the Alliance nor Devil Hall's second attack had done any permanent damage to the U.S., but this was different. If Vindictus succeeded, it could very well be the end of their country as they knew it. "The problem is, we haven't found any recent leads," Stephen continued. "Aston, have you found the other members of their organization?" "I've confirmed most of them, but not everyone. Their leader is especially elusive. There's virtually no information on him." Aston paused before asking, "Mr. Adams, do you want to take action?" "Yes, we have to prepare for their operation. It's over if they catch us off guard." "But if we make our move now, won't we be alerting them?" "There's no other way. We can't just sit and wait for them to carry out their operation. They're at the final stages of their scheme. Being too passive will cost us. Alerting them is unavoidable, but once they figure out we're onto them, they'll be forced to make a move again. Then we'll be able to track them." After hearing Stephen's explanation, the four guardians thought his strategy was a good idea. Under Stephen's command, the hidden clans began to rally large groups of their people. Even though Stephen was the sovereign, he couldn't directly dispatch the military, because it would risk exposing his status. The world thought he was dead, and he planned to keep it that way for the time being. His only option was to use the palace and the hidden clans to indirectly notify the country to prepare for battle. Vindictus's moves weren't clear at the moment. They had to keep vigilant, and this was especially important on the eve of the storm. But 10 days later, there were still no moves from Vindictus. Stephen began to feel uneasy. Everyone, including the aristocrats and the military, were tense after 10 days of being on high alert. If this went on, they would doubt the incoming danger and let down their guard. It would be a fatal blow if Vindictus chose that time to attack. Stephen called the four guardians over. "Did we make a miscalculation?" Aston asked in concern. "It's been more than a week, but Vindictus hasn't done anything. Do you think they're secretly escaping overseas?" "No, they wouldn't. Every member of their organization has a deep hatred for the country. Our current situation is advantageous for them. Even if they were escaping, we would have caught on to them." Nor cracked his knuckles and flexed his hands. "Aren't they being too quiet? I hope they make their move soon. I can't wait to fight them." Stephen smiled in amusement. "It won't be long now. Aston, have you been keeping tabs on the members you've found?" "Yes, so far it hasn't been a problem," Aston said. "I found their identities, so their whereabouts aren't that hard to track. The leader is the only one I still haven't found. The only thing we know about him is his code name, Odin." "So that's why you thought they were secretly leaving the country?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Adams. I've tracked down Gwen and used her to search for Odin, but when we came close to finding him, he shook us off and disappeared." "It's not your fault," Stephen said. "He's the leader of Vindictus for a reason. Keep investigating. Their organization is a dangerous one because they're meticulous, secretive, and powerful. We have to find a lead before they launch their operation." At one of the various private residences that Vindictus used as a base, its core members, Odin, Gwen, and Luther, were holding a meeting. They'd chosen a building near Annapolis because the more dangerous the location, the less likely their enemy would discover them. No one would expect them to be hiding right under their noses. It had been half a month since they'd heard from Vito. After hearing that he'd killed the second-ranked guard in one move, Gwen and Luther were even more excited to see this operation through to the end. "Mr. Vito still hasn't gotten in contact with you?" Gwen asked. "He told us to calm down and wait quietly," Odin said. "He's gathering his allies. He's not working alone. He has multiple powerful organizations on his side." Luther was confused. "Is he abandoning us?" No, to sum it up in one sentence, he's trying to create a diversion. After he rounds up his allies, we'll take action and stir up conflict across the U.S. to draw attention away from him. That's when Vito and his people will launch a consolidated attack on the country. That will spark chaos everywhere, and the flames of war will be unavoidable. Gwen and Luther now understood what Vito had been up to. More than a century ago, Vito had relied on his profound martial arts to roam the country, causing mass destruction wherever he went. He'd even taken down the other 4 erudites on his own. At that time, Vito had believed that in the face of absolute strength, nothing could stand in his way. He used to be a loner who used brute force to deal with everything, Gwen said. Who would have thought he knew how to strategize? Maybe he couldn't stop thinking about his mistakes during his time in prison, Odin said. If he wasn't alone back then, he might not have lost his wife. Now he's become someone who knows how to rely on others and use them to his advantage. He's not the same person he used to be. While they were discussing Vito, the man himself issued an order. It was brief and straight to the point. Move out at midnight. Vito had planned for the operation to begin at midnight. His talent for strategizing was evident because people were less alert in the early hours of the morning due to their body replenishing the energy they'd consumed during the day. It was typical for those on night duty to be less vigilant than those working during the day. There was a map attached to the message from Vito. The areas of interest were marked with a red dot. Are we making our move at midnight? Luther asked. That's right. Odin pointed to the red dots on the map. Here, here, and here. Remember all of them. These are our targets. The red dots covered a large area, but Vindictus had been deploying their members across the country for the past few weeks. They were stationed close to the locations marked out on the map. Inform the other members. We'll take action at midnight. If our enemy is alerted or the battle escalates, retreat right away. Remember, our goal is to create a diversion. The real show will fall on Vito's shoulders. For the past few weeks, Stephen had been staying at one of the palace's temporary bases to monitor Vindictus's movements. Late into the night, Aston found him standing in the courtyard, worrying about the country and his people. Mr. Adams, it's already 11:30. You should call it a night. Taking care of yourself before worrying about others. Stephen didn't actually need the rest. His cultivation had progressed significantly after the battle in Cadus. His mental state wouldn't deteriorate even if he stayed awake for weeks on end. But he had been working tirelessly for the past few days. To Aston, he looked tired, as if he hadn't gotten a good night's sleep in days. Aston was just looking out for him, so Stephen acknowledged his concern and said, I'll go upstairs soon. After Aston left, Stephen stayed in the courtyard for another 20 minutes. He went back to his room 2 minutes before midnight. What he didn't know was that midnight had already arrived for Vindictus. Their operation had begun. Luther and his group were hiding in the outer region of the country near a military laboratory. They launched a surprise attack at midnight, but it wasn't as surprising as they'd expected. The laboratory seemed to have prepared for this. They didn't panic and dealt with Luther's group with relative ease, making it impossible for them to deal with any real damage. In other words, Luther's surprise attack had failed. He remembered Odin's warning to not linger and retreat if the outcome wasn't favorable. Luther had no choice but to leave after dragging out the battle as long as he could. At the same time, Gwen and her group were carrying out a night raid at a military academy. The academy had a long history. If they suffered any losses, it would be a heavy blow to the country. Gwen had initially anticipated her success, but she ended up in the same predicament as Luther. The military academy had long been prepared for this. Their impenetrable defense prevented her group from entering. Gwen had failed, so she could only accept the same outcome as Luther. Vindictus's other teams had also begun their operations. That night, multiple attacks were launched across the country. Not every place had been heavily guarded like the military laboratory and academy. Many places were destroyed, but because of Stephen's preparations in advance, the country didn't suffer a huge loss. Stephen had just washed up and crawled into bed when the 4 guardians came knocking on his door. "Mr. Adams, it's like you predicted," Aston reported when Stephen opened the door. "Vindictus made their move." "Where?" Aston opened a map on his tablet and pointed to several locations across the country. "Most of the places they targeted were prepared. Some of them even managed to push them back." Stephen nodded, but his attention was still on the map. "Our deployment was practically transparent. We weren't being secretive, but it doesn't seem like the palace or the hidden clans have been exposed yet." Nor leaned against the table. "In my opinion, it doesn't matter even if we were exposed. Vindictus is surfaced, so we'll be having an all-out confrontation soon." "But there's something suspicious about their attack tonight," Stephen said. "This is their final operation, but it didn't do much damage. The locations they targeted were important, but not important enough to take down our country. This doesn't align with their previous operations." "You're right," Aston agreed. "They have the advantage, so why didn't they launch a large-scale attack instead?" "Even if they failed, it would have caused a lot of damage," Stephen continued. "What they did tonight is far from what they're capable of." "What were they trying to achieve?" the 4 guardians asked. Everyone was confused. Stephen shook his head. "I don't know either." Vito arrived at the northern border with a group of assassins and mercenaries. He peered up at the wall with interest. "Is this the Northern Gate?" The Northern Gate was one of the 4 gates surrounding the U.S. The city wall was over 300 feet. It was so high that it seemed to tower into the clouds. "Yes, there are 4 gates in total with 4 gatekeepers as their guard," Vito's subordinate replied. "The only way into the country from overseas is through one of the gates. They've sent hundreds of thousands of troops to assist the gatekeeper. He's from a martial arts family, and his cultivation is profound." Vito glanced at his subordinate from the corner of his eye. "Are you trying to boost our enemy's morale?" His gaze was intimidating, and his subordinate felt a chill run down his spine. He was so scared that he swallowed the words he was about to say. Much to his relief, Vito turned away. "Let's see how strong he really is." At that moment, the northern gatekeeper walked up to the tower at the top of the city wall to observe the crowd below. "Who are you?" Vito looked up at him. "We would like to enter the country. Are you the northern gatekeeper? I'll give you 1 minute. Open the gate and welcome us into the U.S. If not, then I'll burn this place to the ground." The northern gatekeeper pulled his gun from his holster. "Those who trespass will be killed." He pulled the trigger and fired a bullet laced with inner energy. It traveled at supersonic speed. Vito casually stepped to the side and dodged without batting an eye. He was faster than a bullet. "Who are you?" the gatekeeper demanded. Vito didn't reply. In the next second, he leaped into the air and reached the top of the wall in less than 5 seconds. Before the gatekeeper knew what was happening, Vito's hand was around his neck. With the flick of a wrist, the gatekeeper's neck was broken. "I'm Vito, but I guess it's too late for introductions." Following the gatekeeper's death, the army of the northern border was in chaos. They prepared for battle, but Vito jumped down and regrouped with his team. "Our next target is the western gate." At the palace's temporary base, Aston received another urgent report. "Mr. Adams, an unknown group attacked the 4 gates. The northern gatekeeper was killed. The other 3 are alive, but they've been injured." Stephen couldn't believe it. Either one of the gatekeepers had the strength to dominate a region. Their martial arts were at least on par with the 4 great generals. But 3 of them had been injured, and the other had been killed. Whoever their enemy was couldn't be underestimated. Aston continued with his report. After that, they launched another raid on the sites that Vindictus previously attacked. One of the laboratories they destroyed was built for developing new weapons. Nor, Wes, and Sorov frowned. They were the guardians of the palace, but even they weren't confident in carrying out such a large-scale attack successfully. Stephen's expression darkened. "So this is Vindictus's final operation, but I don't understand how we didn't see this coming when we've been monitoring them." The second wave of attacks wasn't carried out by Vindictus, Aston said. According to the soldiers on the front lines, the enemy's attire isn't commonly worn here. My guess is they're part of a mercenary organization from overseas. Stephen was enlightened. I get it now. Vindictus's night raids were a decoy. The second wave is the real operation. Aston was impressed that he'd caught on so quickly. Their leader was the one who injured 3 of the gatekeepers and killed the other. According to witnesses, they claimed that he was capable of extraordinary feats, like leaping thousands of feet into the air, punching a crater through the earth with his bare fist, and moving at the speed of light. Nor, Wes, and Sorav looked at each other. That sounded like something that only Stephen could do. Nor was not convinced. Are you sure your information is credible? Maybe they were so scared that they exaggerated some of the details. I was just stating facts, Aston replied calmly. The troops stationed at the gates saw with their own eyes how the enemy leader easily dodged a bullet from the northern gatekeeper. He even killed the gatekeeper in one strike. There was no chance for him to fight back. Whether the eyewitness accounts are true or not, our priority is to investigate their leader's background, Stephen said. Aston, I'll leave that to you. Wes, keep an eye on Vindictus. They might take advantage of the chaos to escape overseas. Intercept them. We can't let them get away. Aston and Wes left to carry out his orders. Stephen proceeded to assign Nor and Sorav their respective missions. Aston soon returned to give an update on the situation. We've received information that the enemy has set foot in our country's territory, but we haven't found their exact location. We also don't know where their next target is. Didn't I give you permission to use the highest level tracking system that we have available? You still couldn't find them? Stephen asked. No, they're avoiding detection somehow. Stephen couldn't figure out who could possibly be behind this. Keep investigating. We don't know who our opponent is. The only thing we can do is prepare ourselves for battle. Inform the palace and the hidden clans to maintain a level 1 state of emergency. Stephen took the initiative to contact the Leviathan unit, hoping to get some leads on the enemy's identity. To his disappointment, even with the Leviathan unit's intelligence network, they haven't been able to find anything that the palace already didn't know. At that moment, news of the United States' 4 gates being attacked and 3 of the gatekeepers being injured with 1 being killed spread across the ocean. The hostile countries overseas hadn't expected this day to come so soon. They'd attempted all kinds of schemes in the past, but nothing they had ever did had shaken the U.S. to this extent. But today, the U.S. had fallen into an embarrassing state. First, the former commander betrayed the country. Second, the sovereign was killed. And now, the country was in chaos from 4 of their gates being attacked. The factions overseas that were at odds with the U.S. celebrated when they received the news. Many of them deliberated over taking advantage of this opportunity to take down the country for good. As for the United States, after the gates were attacked, the next target was the military bases. When even they were heavily damaged, the people's fear and anxiety grew. The country was like a house turned into ruins overnight from a hurricane. It was like a broken ship sailing in the middle of a storm, at risk of capsizing at any moment. At this time, Vito was standing at the peak of a mountain. A crowd of his followers was below him, chanting his name and praising his accomplishments. He enjoyed the feeling. One of his subordinates said, "We've taken over the gates, military bases, and most of the borders. The only places left standing are the northern and southern borders. Kylan Gale, the commander-in-chief, is guarding the north, and Sylvia Straya, the general of the army, is guarding the south. Both of them are from aristocratic families. The commander's real name is Kylan Chevalier, and the general is from the Estrella family." "They're aristocrats?" Vito asked. His interest was piqued. "Next will be their turn then. I hope they don't disappoint me." So far, Vito had been sweeping through his obstacles with ease. His invincibility was somewhat disappointing. He wanted to fight someone on his level. The hidden clans were the next strongest after the 5 erudites. Maybe Kylan and Sylvie could entertain him. Before we target the northern and southern borders, there's one thing I have to do. I want to let the country know that I've returned." After the gates and military bases were breached, the U.S. was at a loss. The country braced themselves for another wave of attacks, but the enemy was silent for the next 3 days. However, something even more shocking than a night raid happened. A video appeared on every platform. There was only one person in the video, and it was Vito. He'd retained his youthful, handsome appearance from over 100 years ago. His smile was charming and bewitching as he stared into the camera. He only said one sentence. "Remember me? My name is Vito, and I'm back." The video flashed, and a black screen appeared. Vito's laughter sounded in the background. But his video didn't elicit any reaction from the people of the U.S. The 5 erudites were famous over a century ago, but they had been long forgotten after so many years. The only ones who were truly aware of the threat that Vito posed were the hidden clans. Even the martial artists among the aristocratic families who had reached the martial grandmaster realm were nervous. Aside from the hidden clans, the Leviathan unit had the most interactions with Vito. The country had gone all out to restrain him over a century ago. They'd sent the other 4 erudites and hundreds of thousands of elite troops after him, but after much sacrifice, they only managed to capture him. They weren't confident that they had what it took to kill him. Moreover, not a single prison in the country had the means to detain him. The country had to resort to imprisoning him in the Abyssal Penitentiary, where he'd be locked up until he died from old age. Contrary to everyone's expectations, Vito had been released, and he was back for vengeance. Even the famed Abyssal Penitentiary couldn't keep him down. The Leviathan unit had led the operation to capture Vito back then. It had been more than a century, but his strength was deeply rooted in their memory. "Has the authenticity of the video been confirmed?" the leader of the unit asked in the conference room. The intelligence officer answered, "I just contacted the Abyssal Penitentiary. They've confirmed that Vito has left. He was behind the recent attacks." "I thought it was impossible for him to break out," one of the members said worriedly. "The other 4 erudites are missing. Who else can subdue him?" "From his attack patterns, it's obvious that he's conspiring with Vindictus," someone else responded. "Unlike back then, he's working with a team. He's not alone. If the other 4 erudites don't show themselves, then the U.S. will be a fallen country soon." "They were heavily injured back then," the leader said. "We can't rely on them to show up and deal with Vito." Silence filled the room. If not them, then who could stop Vito and his team? One of the members spoke up. "I've thought of someone." Everyone turned to look at him. "Who?" "Stephen Adams, the former commander and the current sovereign. He fought against 2 million people in Cadus and survived a missile. Then he hid for 3 months and came back to the country. If he can't take Vito down, no one can." The Leviathan unit lit up, but the leader continued to frown. "The sovereign is skilled, but don't forget who we're up against. You and I both know how strong Vito really is. Can the sovereign really fight on par with him?" Silence filled the room again as the Leviathan unit compared Stephen and Vito. Their hopes were crushed. "Vito defeated 4 of the erudites," the leader continued to explain. "I don't think the sovereign stands a chance." "Then what should we do?" someone asked. "We can't just sit and wait for death." "Our only option now is to ask the 4 erudites for assistance. They were injured back then, but they were participants in the operation to capture Vito, and they're familiar with him. Maybe they have a plan to deal with him." After some discussion, the higher-ups of the Leviathan unit agreed with the leader's suggestion. But the 4 erudites had been missing for over a century. They were nowhere to be found. The Leviathan unit needed to put in a lot of effort if they wanted to find them. After the video was released, Vito was dumbfounded by the people's reaction. Hardly anyone knew who he was. But that wasn't a problem. If they didn't know who he was, then he would show them. One day later, Vito's past was spread across the country through word of mouth. One storyteller got to work and adapted the story into a riveting and engrossing tale. More than 100 years ago, the 5 strongest martial artists of the U.S. were known as the 5 erudites of the Central Plains. Vito was the strongest of the 5. He defeated the other 4 erudites and held his own against hundreds of thousands of troops. Over a century has passed, and Vito, who was imprisoned in the Abyssal Penitentiary, is back. There are rumors that he's even stronger than before. He might be invincible. Several people in the audience had their doubts. Is there no one who can stop him? The storyteller smiled and waved his fan. Not convinced? Then who do you think can take him down? The sovereign, of course, someone shouted. As soon as these words left his mouth, he regretted them, because he realized that the sovereign was no more. At this point, every listener had the same thought. If the sovereign were still around, the country wouldn't be in this predicament. Even if he was alive, he's no match for Vito, the storyteller said. The Leviathan unit confirmed it. But if we can't count on the sovereign, who can we count on? Someone asked. This time, even the storyteller fell silent. Ever since Vito broke through the gates in military bases, the people had begun to panic. Their safety couldn't be guaranteed. When Vito's video was released, the people didn't really understand the threat. It wasn't until Vito's background was spread that the fear really sunk in. As tension festered among the people, the Leviathan unit began to feel like they were sitting on pins and needles all day. The higher-ups held another emergency meeting to discuss a countermeasure. They included the other subunits and departments in their discussion. There was one agenda item for the emergency meeting. Select the strongest members from each unit and department for a direct confrontation with Vito. The team would be known as the Vanguard subunit, but everyone knew that whoever joined would be faced with certain death. When the leader of the Leviathan unit asked if anyone wanted to volunteer, everyone lowered their heads and kept quiet. The leader didn't know what to make of it. On one hand, they still had no plan, but on the other, this was confirmation that Vito wasn't the same person he used to be. He was much stronger than before. Stephen had also seen Vito's video, but like most of the people in the country, he wasn't familiar with him. Dale, however, was all too familiar with the young man on the screen. When he saw Vito, his eyes widened in horror, and a shudder ran through him. Dale was one of the strongest martial artists among the aristocrats, but one video terrified him. Stephen was puzzled by his reaction. Is he that frightening? Dale took a deep breath to calm down. He is. Remember the covenant with the aristocrats signed with the officials back then? We weren't afraid of the Leviathan unit. We were afraid of the 5 erudites of the Central Plains. They went by the names Erwin, Vito, Sal, Norman, and Charles. Of the 5 of them, Vito was the strongest. We compromised with the officials for 2 main reasons. First, we couldn't risk being annihilated by the 5 erudites. And second, we hoped that we could improve our martial arts and train one of our members to be as strong as them. Unfortunately, there's no one among us who's reached that level. That's why Wayne wanted to recruit you into the family when he first met you. Stephen had heard of the 5 erudites, but he didn't know that the conflict between them and the aristocrats ran this deep. He hadn't realized how strong they were until after Vito attacked the gates and military bases. If Stephen fought him, Vito would probably be the strongest opponent he'd ever encountered. Stephen glanced at the map on the projector. Every location of Vito's targets had been marked with a red circle. The only areas he hadn't been were to the north and southern borders. Kylan was guarding the northern border, while Sylvie was guarding the southern border. Because Kylan was in the northern border was regarded as the country's strongest line of defense. While Stephen was contemplating Vito's next move, the northern and southern borders were being attacked. Kylan had been actively preparing for battle, so the losses were initially minimal. But the enemy was fierce and relentless. As the battle dragged on, the losses became significant. Kylan and his students led their respective armies and tried to resist. Kingsley, how many casualties are on our side? Kingsley's expression was grim. No casualties among the 4 great generals and the armored cavalry battalion, but more than half of our other troops have been injured or killed. If this goes on, we are going to be wiped out. We can't let that happen. After a pause, Kylan asked, "How are Sylvie and her troops doing in the south?" "I'm not sure, but I don't think they're faring much better." "What about Vito? Any news on him?" Waves of enemies had swarmed towards the border, but there was no sign of Vito. As an aristocrat, Kylan's fear of the 5 erudites was deeply rooted. After that video circulated across the country, assassins and mercenaries from around the world flocked to the U.S., but their leader, Vito, seemed to have vanished without a trace. That made Kylan uneasy. "No," Kingsley replied. "I've heard rumors that he's preparing for his final march into Annapolis. Everyone knows that's his ultimate goal. If Annapolis falls, what should we do?" Kylan hesitated. If this were any other time, he would have scolded Kingsley for not having confidence in their country. But their current opponent was Vito, the strongest erudite. In the end, Kylan said, "The higher-ups will find a way to stop him. We should prioritize defending the border and hope he doesn't show up here." If Vito appeared, there was no telling how many of his troops would be left after the massacre. All of a sudden, a bone-chilling aura swept across the battlefield. A violent gust of wind tore through the obstacles in its path. Dark clouds blotted out the sun, and the wildlife fled in all directions. The pressure in the air bore down on Kylan and his troops. Some with a weaker constitution for martial arts sustained injuries. Kylan was transfixed by the sight of a young man emerging from the crowd of assassins and mercenaries. Vito was like a god of slaughter, with the ability to shatter the heavens and the earth. Kylan couldn't tear his gaze away. For a moment, he couldn't think or breathe. Kingsley's question snapped him out of his trance. "Mr. Gale, is that Vito?" Kylan forced himself to look away. He turned to see his students staring at him with curiosity in their eyes. Vito's appearance hadn't unnerved them in the same way it had done to him. They didn't understand how dangerous he was. Kylan took a deep breath to pull himself together. He couldn't lose it here. Everyone's lives depended on him. "Yes, that's Vito. Defend the border at all costs." At his command, multiple cannons at the top of the city wall fired at the same time. Cannonballs rained down on the enemy, dealing their massive numbers a heavy blow. Vito was unscathed. He fearlessly strolled through the rain of bullets and cannon fire. Kylan's heart caught in his throat. He wasn't sure if the Sovereign was capable of something like that. Kingsley ordered the soldiers under his command to shift their target. Another round of guns and cannons was fired with Vito as the target. He vanished a second before the attacks landed. Kylan felt a surge of oppressive aura behind him. He knew who it was without turning around. Before he could react, Vito made his move. Kingsley was standing closest to Vito, and he took the first hit. He crashed heavily to the ground, coughing up blood. Raksha, Arlet, and Constant were outraged. Before Kylan could stop them, they charged at Vito and attacked from 3 different directions. Vito didn't move. He simply waved his hand and sent the 3 of them flying back. They collapsed in a heap next to Kingsley. When Vito first appeared, Kylan's troops didn't understand what was so frightening about him, but they did now. Vito turned his attention to Kylan and sized him up. "Are you the new commander-in-chief?" Ever since he was released from the Abyssal Penitentiary, he hadn't encountered any decent opponents. He'd been looking forward to meeting Kylan after finding out that he was from an aristocratic family. Kylan met his searching gaze. "Yes, I'm the current commander, Kylan Gale." Vito grinned. "You think you can stop me?" "Even if I can't, I'll die trying." "I know you're from an aristocratic family. Show me what you're capable of." Without warning, Vito flicked his wrist and unleashed another torrential gust of wind. It was so fast that Kylan didn't have a chance to react. He was knocked back and crashed hard against the wall. He fell to his knees, chest heaving and coughing up blood. "Is that it? I thought you would be more impressive. I suppose this is all there is to the hidden clans." Kylan gritted his teeth and wiped the blood from his mouth. I'm not done.
I think you are, Vito said mockingly. You're no match for me. Kylan balled his hands into fists, willing himself to stand. He didn't know what was wrong with him. It felt like the walls were closing in. He could barely breathe. Someone appeared in front of Kylan and grabbed his arms to hold him back. He raised his head and came face to face with Sylvie. Sylvie had hurried over with a few of her troops after the southern border fell. She'd heard that Vito was here. Fear of the 5 erudites had been deeply ingrained into all of the aristocrats, and Kylan was no exception. There was terror in her gaze that she'd never seen before. He didn't seem to be aware of it, but he was shaking uncontrollably, and his breaths were short and ragged. Kylan, we can't win. We have to leave, now. Staying here will only increase our casualties. Her voice seemed to snap him out of his daze and ground him in reality. Sylvie, why are you here? What about the southern border? Was it already... It's been taken over. Vito's here. You and your troops are about to be wiped out. We have to leave. Are you telling me to run? I can't do that. This is my responsibility as the commander. Take my troops and leave. I'll stay behind. This is no time to be stubborn. If you stay here, you'll be throwing your life away with no reason. You know as well as I do that an aristocrat can't win against Vito. Even the sovereign might not be able to defeat him. What can you do? Kylan didn't respond, so Sylvie kept trying to talk him out of a meaningless death. I've received orders from the Leviathan unit. They want us to give up the northern and southern borders to preserve our remaining forces. When he still didn't say anything, she shook him gently. Kylan? I heard you, Kylan said quietly. Sylvie let go of him and stood up to give him space. He was angry, but it wasn't directed at her. He was angry at himself. Kylan staggered to his feet and rounded up his troops. They retreated at his command. With no one left on the battlefield, Vito took over the northern border. He stood on top of the wall and looked out over the battlefield below, reveling in the massacre and bloodshed. He'd taken over the gates, military bases, and the borders. The country's defenses had been torn down. There was nothing stopping him now. The assassins and mercenaries knelt before their leader and chanted his name. Before Vito came along, they'd attempted to take down the U.S. multiple times. But they'd failed, and many of them had been sent to prison for their crimes. They never thought a day like this would come, where they were free to rampage across the very land that had once imprisoned them. And the person who had made this possible was Vito. Meanwhile, Odin, Gwen, and Luther were having a meeting at their base. Like I thought, the country is helpless against Vito, Odin said. Gwen and Luther were filled with praise for him. It's thanks to your brilliant plan. A bloody storm took over the country the instant Vito made his appearance. Odin looked grateful. If I knew he was this strong, I would have gotten him out of prison sooner. Then we wouldn't have had to sacrifice 2 million people in Cadus. There had been members of Vindictus among the 2 million sent to dispose of the sovereign. None of them had made it out alive. What should we do next? Luther asked. Should we take this chance and escape? That was my original plan, Odin said. But I've changed my mind. With how things stand, why should we run away? Gwen was the first to understand. The U.S. is in chaos. They don't have the time to keep an eye on us. We can run off whenever we want, so we might as well stay and see how this ends. I'm looking forward to their downfall, Luther said. It's only a matter of time. I wonder what the final outcome will be. Do you think Vito will destroy the country beyond repair? Odin shook his head. Not necessarily. Vito is strong, but the U.S. has been through thousands of years of history. They encountered many threats in the past, but they survived and preserved their legacy. There's a high chance they'll want to reconcile with Vito. Gwen and Luther were taken aback. Vito was invincible. It would be a simple task for him to take over the country. If he had any brains, he would never reconcile. Why would the officials do that? Luther asked. They're proud and arrogant. They would never lower their heads to someone else. They're the type who'd rather die than surrender. Just look at the country's history. None of their predecessors ever surrendered, not even when they were in dire situations. I think so too, Gwen agreed. Even if the US was down to its last soldier, they would never reach an agreement with Vito. And even if they wanted to, Vito wouldn't agree. I thought the same thing at first, but think about it this way. If this continues, the US will only suffer more losses. Their finances, manpower, and resources will eventually be used up. Vito might even start killing off the civilians. Before long, the country will be at risk of being ruined. Gwen and Luther thought Odin's reasoning was plausible. The officials wouldn't let their country fall to ruin. All they needed was a way to get Vito to reconcile with them. I don't think Vito will refuse, Odin continued. He wanted to take revenge on the country for his wife's death, but even if he succeeds, she won't come back to life. If the officials give in, there's a high chance that he'll agree. But the question is, how much will he make the officials sacrifice? That's the best form of revenge. At the Leviathan Unit's conference room, the atmosphere was tense, and the expressions were solemn. Vito had taken over the northern and southern borders, forcing Kylan and Sylvie to retreat. All of their defenses had been broken through. No one had been able to stop Vito's advance. The country would be finished the second he entered Annapolis. The leader of the Leviathan Unit looked around the table. Any ideas? This is impossible, one of them said. Vito's martial arts are beyond us. He's even stronger than he was a century ago. Even Kylan and Sylvie couldn't do anything to him. The Sovereign might not be able to take him down either. The leader agreed. Kylan and Sylvie's troops suffered many casualties. We can't send Mr. Adams to the battlefield without a plan. If we lose him, we'll be done for. But Vito is rapidly approaching. How should we deal with him? No one had an answer. After a long period of silence, the leader spoke again. Have you found the other 4 erudites? Another silence followed. Just when the leader thought it was over for them, the intelligence officer rushed into the room. Good news! We've found them. Somewhere deep in the mountains, 4 elderly men with white hair and wheelchairs were watching their students practice their martial arts. The terrain here was complicated, and it was covered with fog all year round. Few visitors came to the mountain, but those who stepped into the mist and crossed the rivers would discover a paradise ahead. The 4 elderly men were 4 of the famed erudites of the Central Plains: Erwin, Sal, Norman, and Charles. Back then, they'd sustained heavy injuries from their battle with Vito, and they'd ended up in a wheelchair for the rest of their lives. Have you heard? Erwin said. The Leviathan Unit is looking for us. Vito's back. Hatred flashed in Sal's eyes. We've been waiting for this day. This is our chance to get back at him for what he did to us. We've been hiding in the mountains for the past century to train our students for the sole purpose of getting rid of him, Norman said. It's time to let our students outside. The Leviathan Unit was in the middle of their meeting when they received news that the remaining 4 erudites were alive. Are they going to leave the mountains? The leader asked expectantly. No, the intelligence officer said. They haven't recovered. It'll be difficult for them to make it here. The leader's expression fell. Then what good news do you have? The erudites won't be coming, but they're sending their 4 students. They taught their students everything they know. They're exceptional martial artists, and they've perfected a technique that specifically counters Vito's martial arts. With them on our side, we don't have to worry about him anymore. The Leviathan Unit was thrilled by the news. This was the only piece of good news they'd received in the past few days. The erudite students were on their way to Annapolis. They would try to get there as soon as they could. We should prepare a celebratory feast for them, the leader suggested. One member voiced their doubts. Is that appropriate when we're in a crisis? They're saving our country, the leader said. Don't tell me you think they don't deserve good wine and good food before the battle. The person who just spoke kept quiet. The erudites' students had yet to arrive, but the Leviathan Unit was acting like victory was in their grasp. Before they arrive, we should also come up with a strategy. We can't let them think that we're sitting around doing nothing. I suggest we form the Vanguard subunit like we previously discussed. We'll make the aristocratic families take the initiative to sign up. Each member is required to have reached the Grandmaster realm. The Leviathan unit was aware that Stephen had united the aristocratic families, so they saw nothing wrong with using them as their own resources. The leader continued confidently. With them in the Vanguard subunit, our chances of success will increase significantly. This time around, his suggestion was met with unanimous agreement from the rest of the members. They'd regained their confidence after finding out that the erudites' students would be lending them their assistance. "Why didn't you include the Sovereign?" one member asked. "Stephen's not necessary," the leader said. "The erudites' students are more than enough to deal with Vito. But the Sovereign won't be idle either. I've decided to let him wrap up the issue with Vindictus. That way, we'll be allocating our resources appropriately and making use of everything we have." In the beginning, the Leviathan unit had planned to use Stephen as their final trump card, but the situation was different now. The erudites had carefully selected and trained 4 talented students for several decades. They'd also been practicing formulations to counter Vito's martial arts. In the eyes of the Leviathan unit, Stephen was redundant. To not waste their resources, they would send him to take care of Vindictus. But the Leviathan unit had overlooked one critical fact. The erudites' students had been practicing a technique targeting the Vito from over a century ago. Many years had passed, and he'd grown much stronger since then. It was uncertain whether they had what it took to take him down. Following the meeting's conclusion, the Leviathan unit sent some of their members to convey their orders to Stephen. "You don't want me to participate in the operation?" Stephen asked in surprise. "Yes, the other erudites have sent their 4 students to deal with Vito. Leave it to them." "It's good to have assistance, but the team will be stronger with me around." "I think you're misunderstanding something. They're not there to assist. They're the main forces. Let's not drag out this conversation. We've made our decision. Your interference is not needed." Stephen couldn't understand what the Leviathan unit was thinking. He was the reason the investigation on Vindictus had come this far. Ever since Vito had made his appearance, Stephen had been prepared to face him. But now the Leviathan unit was forbidding him from participating. "Then what do you want me to do?" The Leviathan unit went on. "We understand that you've done a lot to investigate Vindictus, but your martial arts can't be compared to the erudites' students. Whether it's background, talent, or martial arts, they're the elites of their field. They're not inferior to you, and they'll be attacking Vito together. The erudites have been devoting themselves to designing a technique against Vito for decades. They've been training their students every day, helping them master their martial arts. They'll be enough to take Vito down. We would like you to assist from the sidelines and take care of Vindictus. They're a crafty organization. You can't underestimate them." The Leviathan unit had made their decision, so Stephen gave up on arguing with them. "I understand. I'll do as you ask. If you need me, then let me know." After the Leviathan unit left, the 4 guardians of the palace showed themselves. They were infuriated by the conversation they'd overheard. Noor was especially angry. "That was crossing the line. They think a few inexperienced kids can match up to you. I'm going to give them a piece of my mind." Before he could storm off, Stephen pulled him back. "Do the 4 of you feel like I'm being wronged? We're not the officials. My responsibility is to protect the country, and my duty is to execute the orders I'm given." "But they're disrespecting you to your face," Noor argued. "They're not taking you seriously just because these 4 kids showed up out of nowhere. You're the Sovereign." "Maybe they're more suitable for the operation than me. The erudites are their teachers, and they've devoted themselves to developing a technique to counter Vito. It's not like our task isn't important. We can't underestimate Vindictus. From now on, we'll shift our focus to their organization." The 4 guardians weren't happy with the way the Leviathan unit was treating Stephen like an extra who could be easily replaced at their convenience. But he'd made his decision, and they would follow it. Later in the day, the Leviathan unit waited for the erudites' students at a garrison area responsible for securing the city of Annapolis. Soldiers armed with guns stood guard at the entrance. The erudites' students arrived in 4 military jeeps. They went by the names Marshall, Colton, Gilbert, and Kenny. They'd taken on the new names that their teachers had given them as a form of respect. They chattered leisurely as they stepped out of the vehicles. The air in the city is different from the mountains. We've been stuck in the wilderness for decades. We're finally free. We should have left earlier. I heard Commander Kylan Gale, General Sylvia Estrella, and the former Commander Stephen Adams are nothing special. If we left the mountain 10 years ago, none of them would be in those positions today. Their words were bold and daring. The four of them didn't stop for a second to consider that Kylan, Sylvia, and Stephen may not be as strong as them, but they were more experienced. Their arrogance stemmed from their background. Their teachers were four of the famed erudites, and now they were considered saviors of the country. The leader of the Leviathan unit went up to them with a smile and gave them a warm welcome. We're the Leviathan unit, and we represent the United States. Our country is depending on you. The four students' arrogance didn't deter the Leviathan unit. On the contrary, it confirmed that their decision to rely on them was correct. Having the necessary confidence was important in situations like these. Marshall, Colton, Gilbert, and Kenny were even more vain after hearing the high expectations for them. Please let the civilians know that with us here, they don't have to worry about veto. Although our teachers were defeated over 100 years ago, they've developed a technique to suppress veto's martial arts, and we've been practicing it on a daily basis. We've perfected it a long time ago. Taking veto down is only a matter of time. Your teachers have put in a lot of effort for the country, the leader said. As their students, you should inherit their legacy and take on the title Erudites of the Central Plains. The four of them rejected his offer modestly. That's not appropriate. That title belongs to our teachers. The leader of the Leviathan unit admired their humble attitude. They were skilled and kept a low profile. Just as he was about to compliment them, they added, "It'll be more appropriate if you call us the four unyielding erudites of the Central Plains instead." The leader thought it was a strange title, but he couldn't call their saviors out on it. Who was he to question their decision? You four have traveled a long way. You must be tired from your journey. We've prepared a banquet to welcome you to Annapolis. Thank you, but our teachers told us not to celebrate until we defeat veto. Your loyalty is admirable. However, we shouldn't rush into things. We're forming a team of vanguards. They'll lend you their assistance to make your jobs easier. Vito's not alone this time. He's working with a large organization. That's not a bad idea. When we charge into the enemy, we'll need sacrifices to buy us time. Well done. We'll follow your strategy. The leader didn't know how to respond. The team would include martial artists in the Grand Master realm or above. To treat them as expendable didn't sit right with him. But this did prove that the four of them were formidable. At the very least, they didn't think much of a Grand Master. Is the former commander part of the team? Kenny asked. Our teachers told us about him before we came down the mountain. He achieved a rank higher than Kylan and Sylvie, even though they're from aristocratic families. I would like to meet him. The erudite, Charles, used to be a military general, and Kenny was a student. When Charles was in the army, he had made significant contributions to the country. He saw Kenny's potential among thousands of soldiers and took him on as a student. Kenny used to serve in the army, so he was interested in how much the military had changed since he was living in the mountains. He was particularly interested in Stephen because he'd single-handedly saved the country from the Alliance. He won't be participating, the leader replied. Kenny was surprised. Why not? Is it because he lost to Kylan in a duel? Why do you even want to meet him? Marshall asked. He couldn't defeat Kylan. That's enough to prove he was no longer of any value. Colton nodded in agreement. I'm not trying to belittle him, but if we left the mountain during the war, there wouldn't have been a need for a commander-in-chief or the general of the army. Even the sovereign might be unnecessary. Kenny was disappointed. That's a shame. I've been wanting to meet him ever since I heard about him. My teacher told me he's talented. If he took the former commander on as a student, his future would have been limitless. Why do you insist on meeting him? Gilbert asked. I heard he was disabled until recently. He's been lying low since he lost his position. He's not necessary to the team. We four are enough to go against veto, Marshall said. He turned to the leader of the Leviathan unit. Gather the members of the vanguard. We don't want to wait any longer than we have to. We'll get it done as soon as we can, the leader said.
The Leviathan unit got to work and sent a recruitment notice to the aristocratic families stating that each member must send at least 20 members to be a part of the Vanguard subunit with a martial arts cultivation of at least the Grand Master realm or above. The aristocratic families were reluctant because while it wasn't specified, the Vanguard would be accompanying the erudites as students to fight with Vito. The students were undoubtedly skilled. Even if they failed, they would still have the ability to protect themselves. But the same couldn't be said about the aristocratic families. They were basically selecting members to send to their deaths. But the aristocrats had submitted to the sovereign, so even though they were reluctant, they had no choice but to follow the Leviathan unit's orders. To preserve their family's strength, they selected the weakest among the Grand Masters. Like everyone else, the Fallon family gathered 20 members to send to the battlefield at the fastest speed. They were the weakest among the Grand Masters, but 20 members were still a lot of people. The other aristocratic families regarded the Fallon family as the sovereign's in-laws, so they requested for them to send an additional 5 members to set an example. The Fallon family didn't lack Grandmaster martial artists, but it wasn't easy to choose those extra 5 members. After all, no one was willing to send themselves to their deaths. After some discussion, the higher-ups of the family finally came to a way to fill in the 5 extra spots. The solution was to draw lots. Right after the meeting, the lots were drawn and the results were out. Wayne's younger brother, Ron Fallon, was not pleased with how the lots had turned out. His son, Eden Fallon, had been chosen to join the Vanguard subunit. The members with the lower status in the family would have accepted their fate, but Ron was different. He had a high status because he was the head of the family's brother. More importantly, his son, Eden, had a talent for martial arts. He'd reached the Grandmaster realm before the age of 25. He had great potential. If Eden joined the Vanguard, there was no telling if he would come back or not. Ron had high hopes for his son, so he couldn't let anything happen to him. Ron was planning to look for Wayne and have a good talk with him, but on second thought, the suggestion to draw lots had been decided by all the higher-ups of the family. It wouldn't be appropriate to talk to Wayne alone, even though they were brothers. The Cassidy family had become members of the Fallon family, but none of them met the criteria, so they were excluded from drawing lots. But that didn't stop them from using the occasion to interact with the Fallon family. While they were there, they noticed Ron's dilemma. Helen saw this as an opportunity and went up to him. "Mr. Ron, you must be worried about your son." Ron waved her off impatiently. "I don't have time for small talk." "What if I can help you?" Ron stopped in his tracks upon hearing that. The entire Fallon family thought the Cassidy family was relying on DeAndre's influence. Therefore, no one really cared about them. Usually, he wouldn't think much of a family with no reputation either, but he was moved when they offered a solution. For the sake of saving his son, even if it was a 1 in 1,000 chance, he would still take it. Ron turned around. "Do you have a solution?" "Of course I do. I wouldn't have come up to you if I didn't." Helen had a smile on her face, and Ron knew that she had a condition. "What is it? Hurry up and say it. If you can get my son out of the team, I guarantee your family a life without worries. As long as you're one of us, I'll make it so no one will look down on you. If you have any problems, just come and find me. I'll help you resolve them." This was Helen's goal. The Cassidy family did have DeAndre's backing, but without contributions, they had a low status within the inner circles of the Fallon family. They urgently needed a way to change their current status. If they had the protection of a member with a prestigious status like Ron, their family would rise up the ranks in no time. "Thank you for your offer," Helen said. "It would be an honor to receive your help. Actually, it's not that hard to resolve your issue. All you need to do is find someone to take his place." Ron frowned. "Do you know that the higher-ups of the family decided on drawing lots? No one can replace my son, and even if they could, who would be willing?" "Please calm down and listen to me. Members of the Fallon family can't replace each other. But what if you find someone who's not from your family?" Ron considered it. That could be possible. The higher-ups had set the rules, but they were limited to the Fallon family. There were no restrictions if an outsider was involved. "Who are you talking about?" Stephen Adams, Helen said with a smile. He's the most suitable candidate to take your son's place. First, he used to be the commander, so he's already above the Grand Master realm. Second, he's the son-in-law of the Cassidy family, but he's not considered a member of the Fallon family. At most, he's only related to them. Third, he's used to the battlefield. If he's not willing to go, who will? The concern on Ron's face vanished in an instant. The former commander? Why didn't I think of that? Then it's settled. I'll get him to take my son's place and send him to I'll ask him to join the Vanguard subunit and fight for our country's glory. Mr. Ron, we still need to discuss this with DeAndre. He dotes on his granddaughter, Kim, and Stephen is her husband. That doesn't sound like a big deal to me. Let's go see DeAndre right away. Ron firmly believed that between Eden and the former commander, DeAndre would definitely choose to protect Eden. Sure enough, DeAndre was on board, and no convincing was needed. You want Stephen to take Eden's place? I have to say, that is a wonderful idea. Eden is young, but he's already reached the Grand Master realm. He has unlimited potential. It would be a pity if he lost his life so early. Ron was delighted to have his support. Someone in the Cassidy family spoke up. But Stephen is Kim's husband and Valeria's father. What will happen to them if he doesn't come back? Eden is an important member of our family, DeAndre snapped. Even though Stephen is my precious granddaughter's husband, I have to make a choice. Besides, with me here, who would dare try to criticize Kim and her daughter? DeAndre's righteous words earned praise from the crowd. With his approval, Helen sent Harry, Rebecca, and Rome to find Stephen. You want me to join the Vanguard subunit and accompany the Erudites as students to fight Vito? Stephen had been planning to deal with Vito himself, but the Leviathan unit didn't want him to get involved. He didn't expect the Cassidy family to come to him with an opportunity. The Erudites' students were skilled, but Stephen wasn't sure if they had what it took to take Vito down. He wouldn't be at ease if he didn't go personally. That's right. Grandpa and Mr. Ron are waiting for you. Hurry up and come with us, Harry urged. Okay, let's go. When the 25 members of the Fallon family were assembled, they prepared to set off to meet up with the rest of the Vanguard subunit. Harry, Rebecca, and Rome had been holding Kim back. She broke free when the team was about to leave. You can't make Stephen die for someone else. Is this the Fallon family you're so proud of? All you know how to do is turn other people into your scapegoat. Her words resonated with several members of the Fallon family who'd been selected to join the team. They didn't think it was fair for Eden to get out of this by having Stephen take his place. DeAndre didn't want to shake the team's morale, so he rushed to clarify. Stephen is the son-in-law of the Cassidy family. He meets the criteria to join the team. Don't forget that he's the former commander, Helen said. He has a responsibility to protect the country. We're in a crisis, and he should be the first one to step up. Harry chimed in. Even if he's not the commander anymore, he used to be a soldier of the country. He should be brave and join the Vanguard. If he doesn't join, wouldn't that make him a coward? Rebecca asked. As for the former commander, risking his life is something he should do. You're being unreasonable, Kim protested. No one listened to her. The Cassidy family had DeAndre's approval, and their numbers gave them the upper hand. Kim, don't worry, Stephen said. Trust me, I'll be back. What are you talking about? You're going to die out there. Why are you letting them drag you off? Stephen gave her a confident smile. I'll be fine. I'll come home and see you and Valeria again. Kim wanted to believe him, but she couldn't stop worrying about him. Everyone knew that there was a high chance that the Vanguard would be wiped out. The team member in front of Stephen told him to stop wasting time. They had to meet up with the rest of the Vanguard. Stephen reassured Kim one more time and said goodbye to her before following the team. On this mission, his identity would be Eden Fallon. They met up with the other members chosen by the aristocratic families and set off for Annapolis. Soon, they arrived at the garrison area. Members of the Vanguard had been selected from across the country. Among the team of 1,000, around 500 of them were from aristocratic families. Marshall, Colton, Gilbert, and Kenny were satisfied with the lineup. They had 1,000 grandmasters at their disposal. Stephen was on the team, but because everyone was dressed in uniform and wearing face coverings, the Leviathan unit didn't spot him. The Leviathan unit faced the vanguard and introduced them to Marshall, Colton, Gilbert, and Kenny. "They're the Erudites' students. You'll be under their command for this mission." The team responded in unison. Marshall and the other three were even more satisfied when they saw how neat their formation was. "With everyone's help, we're sure to get rid of Vito," Marshall said. He turned to the leader of the Leviathan unit. "Where is he now?" "He's at Annapolis's military base." With that information, Stephen, together with the Erudites' students and the vanguard, rushed to the military base located north of the city. After watching them leave, the Leviathan unit began to pay attention to Stephen's side. "This is the beginning of the operation. How's Stephen doing?" the leader asked. "Has he made a move against Vindictus?" After discovering the existence of the Erudites' students, the Leviathan unit stopped attaching honorifics to Stephen's name. "We haven't received an update from him," the intelligence officer reported. "But according to our informants, he hasn't taken action yet." "He hasn't? What is he doing?" "We're not sure about that. I suspect he's throwing a tantrum. He didn't lash out at us when we told him not to participate, but he's probably angry that we're excluding him and choosing the Erudites' students over him." The leader scoffed. "That decision is up to us, not him. Stephen's skilled. He used to be the commander, and he's the current sovereign, but he can't be compared to the Erudites' students. That's the reality, whether he likes it or not. Give him another order. Tell him to take action against Vindictus immediately. Make their organization disappear by the time Vito's defeated." Stephen wasn't around when the Leviathan unit came by again, so the four Guardians received the letter containing the order on his behalf. They didn't think anything of it. Their only leader was the Grand Palace Master, no one else. Vindictus should be eliminated, but Stephen had asked them to stay put, and that was that. After the Leviathan unit left, the four Guardians tossed the letter aside. After Vito occupied Annapolis's military base, he didn't leave immediately, because he realized that the geographic position gave him a high vantage point. He could see the entire country from here. Even someone as obsessed with martial arts as he felt a sense of pride when he stood at the top of the world. His subordinates came over with urgent news. "Vindictus sent us a report. The unyielding Erudites are coming here with a team of 1,000 members." "The unyielding Erudites?" Vito repeated in confusion. "Who are they?" "They're the students of the four Erudites. After they lost to you, they spent over 100 years studying formations and designing a technique to counter your martial arts. They've been training their students on a daily basis and sent them here to take you down." Vito gave him an annoyed look. "That's it? This is the urgent news you wanted to talk about? I thought something serious happened. Erwin, Sal, Norman, and Charles, those four geezers are so persistent. Do they really think they could defeat me with some technique? They're not the only ones who've been studying. I've done extensive research. I'm more familiar with their martial arts. I have a rough guess as to what technique they've designed. It won't be effective against me." The assassins and mercenaries had been intimidated when they had first heard about the Erudites' students, but Vito's confidence boosted their morale. The Leviathan unit wasn't aware of any of this. They were still in high spirits. During the meeting, one of the members suggested, "We should publicize the Erudites' students and reassure the people." The leader supported his idea. "Vito has done a lot of damage to our country. The people are scared and fear for their lives. It's time to encourage them." After the meeting, the existence of the Erudites' students spread across the country. Huge posters appeared on the streets, and LED screens in the metropolitan areas played promotional videos. Under such intense publicity, the students' popularity skyrocketed. The people viewed them as saviors of the country. Morale was at its peak. Everyone was optimistic that the Erudites' students would soon put an end to Vito's rampage. Many establishments started to celebrate the victory in advance, and there were also projects preparing to construct statues of their saviors. They were so popular that their reputation spread overseas. The hostile countries that were rejoicing in the United States' national crisis began to disappear. Like the world across the ocean, Vindictus's optimism had also taken a hit. They thought they could rest easy after releasing Vito from the abyssal penitentiary and watch the country's downfall from behind the scenes. But they had never imagined that the other 4 erudites had a trump card. Where did the erudites' students come from? It's over for Vito. Gwen and Luther turned to their boss. What should we do now? Odin decisively made up his mind. They say the erudites' students perfected a technique to suppress Vito's martial arts. The situation has changed. We can't sit around and do nothing. They'll be coming after us after they take him down. We have to get out of the country. The sooner the better. We leave tonight. Meanwhile, the erudites' students and the Vanguard subunit were advancing towards Annapolis' military base. As someone who used to serve in the army, Kenny took charge of the team. The base is 300 yards ahead. We're almost there. Let's take a break before we continue. Marshall came over and asked, How should we approach Vito when we get there? Kenny pointed at the Vanguard. We'll make them face him first and consume his energy. When they're done, we'll use the technique we've been practicing to finish him off. That's a great idea, Marshall praised. Our chance of success will be higher if we fight him when he's exhausted. We 4 are the key to defeating him. We have to make it out unscathed, Kenny called out to the Vanguard, who was taking a break and reorganizing. Did you all hear that? When the battle begins, you'll have to follow our commands unconditionally. Understood? The team didn't respond. Before coming here, they already knew that this was a suicide mission. They felt even worse when Kenny made it seem like they were chess pieces to be discarded at any time. Even though they weren't ranked that high in their respective families, they were still Grand Masters. They'd never been looked down on like this before. But there wasn't much they could do. The erudites' students were stronger, and they had absolute authority over them. They could only swallow their anger. You don't want to? Kenny asked when no one said anything. Since you're not answering, then I'll take a silence as a yes. His words were still met with no response. He was satisfied and stood up. Everyone's on board, so let's get going. Before they could move, a voice rang out from the crowd. Wait, I disagree. Marshall and Kenny looked around, searching for the source of the voice. The Vanguard turned to stare at the young man who'd just spoken. Kenny followed their gaze and locked eyes with the young man. What's your name? Eden Fallon, Stephen replied. Eden, are you aware of the consequences that come with disobeying your superior? I don't care what the consequences are. I don't agree with your tactic. Kenny had held a high position back when he was in the army. No one had ever questioned him before. Then why don't you tell me? What's wrong with it? First of all, we're the Vanguard. It's natural for us to charge and break through enemy lines. I have no objections to that. But you have to understand that while we are the Vanguard, we are not a suicide squad. We haven't scoped out the enemy, and yet you're telling us to attack relentlessly. If that's not sending ourselves to our death, I don't know what is. A few sentences from Stephen earned him the team's support. Kenny frowned. You make yourself sound so dignified, but the bottom line is, you're afraid of death. That's not true, Stephen retorted. If we were afraid of death, we wouldn't have joined the team. We understand how risky this operation is. If we're killed, then so be it, but it won't be a meaningless death. We won't let you use us as cannon fodder. Watch what you say, Kenny warned. What do you mean we don't understand the enemy? We're the erudites' students, Marshall added. No one understands Vito better than us. What do you know about him? I don't think you understand anything, Stephen shot back. You keep saying your teachers are superior and that so-called technique of yours is the key to this operation. But have any of you ever met Vito before? Do you know how many people are on his side? What about their combat strength? Do you understand all of this? Marshall and the other 3 students were at a loss for words. They'd never considered these questions. They thought their technique was all they needed. Nothing else to say for yourselves? Stephen asked. You 4 don't understand the situation at all. Ever since they descended the mountain, they'd been treated like the country's saviors. Marshall couldn't accept being outdone. Forget it. I know you're afraid of death, so I'll give you a way out. You're fired." He pointed to the side of the road. "Leave the team and get lost." Kenny whispered to Gilbert and Colton, "When we get back, we should investigate his background." Stephen called out to them, "Why? Do you want to settle the score after finding out my background? You're not as brave as you seem." The 4 students were rendered speechless. He continued, "Don't worry, since I'm here, I won't be a deserter. I joined the Vanguard because I want to deal with Vito. I haven't achieved my goal yet, so I can't leave."
You've got quite the backbone,
Marshall mocked. "Even if you wanted to die, we won't be giving you that opportunity. You are no longer a member of the Vanguard." Stephen nodded and stood up. "That's perfect. I don't have to be held back by you 4 anymore. I'll deal with Vito on my own." "You want to get rid of him by yourself?" Kenny asked in disbelief. "Where are you getting this confidence from?" The erudites had devoted decades of their life to designing this technique, but this inconspicuous Vanguard member thought he could take on Vito by himself. That was naive and childishly rebellious. Stephen scanned the crowd. "Is there anyone who wants to work with me?" No one answered him. He decided to try another approach. "If you don't want to die, you'd better follow me. If you stay with them, you'll end up as cannon fodder." There was still no response. Most of them had come to a consensus that with the erudites as students around, their victory against Vito was secured. But the question was, would it be better to stay with the students or to go with Eden Fallon? If they followed the nameless Eden, their future would be uncertain. But if they went with the erudites as students, there was a chance they could make a name for themselves. The students had the support of the entire country, and they had a technique that specialized in suppressing Vito. They would be used as sacrifices, but if they were lucky enough to survive, they would become heroes with military achievements. If they died, the students would kill Vito off anyway. At that time, they would become martyrs of the country, and their families would live well even after their death. If they decided to join Eden, the erudites as students would do everything in their power to make them deserters. Their reputation would be tarnished. The losses outweighed the gains, so everyone stayed quiet. Marshall and the other 3 were about to dismiss Stephen again when someone spoke up in the crowd. "I support you, Eden. I'll come with you." Someone else shouted, "We're gonna die anyway. Why should we be sacrificed?" A third voice rang out, "If we have to die, then we'd rather die an honorable death in battle." Among the 1,000 members of the Vanguard, 18 people got up and stood beside Stephen. Marshall's eyes narrowed. "You really believe his nonsense? You've been fooled, you idiots. If you go with him, you'll become deserters." Now that the 18 members were openly standing on the opposite side, their confidence was renewed. One of them argued, "Even if we become deserters, it's still better than dying for no reason." Stephen regarded his new team with a nod of approval. "I won't disappoint you. Let's go." Marshall was fuming as he watched them separate from the Vanguard and walk off on their own. Kenny patted his shoulder. "It's fine. Losing 19 people isn't a big deal, but his nonsense affected our team's morale. If we sacrifice them, it won't end well for us." As someone who used to serve in the Army, he knew how important morale was to a team. It could be the determining factor in a battle. "Then let's change our strategy," Colton suggested. "I have an idea," Kenny said. "We'll let them attack alongside us and give them a sense of worth. They'll think that since we're their leader, we'll do our best to bring them back alive." Marshall gave him a thumbs up. "That's genius. I'll give them hope and make them feel grateful for our kindness. If they think we care about them, then they'll be more willing to work for us." When Kenny announced their change of plans to the team, they were met with more enthusiasm now than when they didn't have to sacrifice their lives for no reason. The team felt fortunate that they had chosen the right side. They were glad they didn't act impulsively and leave with Eden. They even fantasized that after taking Vito down, they would return to their families and bask in the glory of their victory. In their eyes, Eden and the 18 members who were left were fools to pass up on this opportunity. Marshall addressed the team with a smile. "You've made the right decision to stay with us. 19 people won't be enough on their own. The break is over. Let's continue. Unlike before, the team responded to his instructions loud and clear. They were confident that the erudites' students would pave the way to a bright future. Under their lead, the vanguard made their way to Annapolis's military base. They were unaware that Vito had locked on to their location. He was at the highest point of the military base and looking down at them from above. He had a clear view of 200 miles ahead of him. The erudites' students were enthusiastically leading the team. Vito pitied them, because the ending waiting for them was a one-sided massacre. After separating from the vanguard, Stephen led the 18 members who followed him to the other side of the military base. The 18 members had their doubts when they approached a cliff. "We're going to attack from here?" "Yes, this is a cliff, but there's a way out." Stephen walked over to a secluded area and pushed aside the overgrown weeds, revealing a narrow road that only one person could pass through at a time. As the former commander, he'd traveled through every nook and cranny of the borders. He knew every military base like the back of his hand. The 18 members hadn't realized there was a path behind the bushes because of how well it was hidden. They felt more confident that following Eden was the right choice. "Very few people are aware of this path. I'm the one who—" Stephen caught his mistake and changed his words. "I mean, the former commander constructed this path. I served in the military base near here. That's why I know about it." The 18 members accepted his explanation. "So you were a soldier under the former commander. No wonder you had the courage to speak out against the erudites' students." "They'll see it coming if we attack from the front," Stephen continued. "But this place is different. We're much closer to Vito and his team. It's less than half the distance than if we were to attack from the front. If we attack from here, we can catch them off guard. You've chosen to follow me, so I'll help you make a name for yourselves and bring you home safely." The 18 members nodded and expressed their appreciation for him. Before they set off, Stephen received a message from Aston. "The leader of Vindictus, Odin, is about to leave the country. Would you like us to send our people to stop him?" He thought for a moment before sending a reply. "Stay low for the time being." It wasn't that Stephen didn't trust in the palace's capabilities, but he was too far away to manage them properly. 500 members of the aristocratic families had been sent to face off against Vito, and the rest were scattered across the country. To stop Odin, they would have to rely on the palace alone. Vindictus was still a mystery. If the palace attacked recklessly, they could be caught in a trap. That would lead to meaningless casualties and risk exposing the palace to their enemy. Compared to stopping Vindictus, dealing with Vito was the top priority right now. At this time, the entire country was paying attention to the erudites' students. The palace didn't take action, so Vindictus' escape was smooth sailing. They were met with zero resistance and encountered no obstacles on their way out of the country. The leader of the Leviathan unit was furious when he received this information. "What is Stephen doing? I reminded him multiple times to keep an eye on Vindictus." "We've lost contact with him," the intelligence officer reported. "We've tried to search for him, but we can't find him. He seems to be deliberately hiding from us." "Who does he think he is?" The more the leader ranted, the angrier he became. Is he ignoring the law and his superiors because of that battle in Cadus? One member spoke up. "This is a serious dereliction of duty. At a critical moment when the erudites' students are about to have a decisive battle with Vito, the sovereign ignored our orders, abandoned his post, and allowed Vindictus to escape. I suggest removing him from his position to set an example for everyone else." Silence filled the room. Stephen was the first sovereign appointed in hundreds of years. He'd gotten the country out of a crisis several times, and it hadn't been that long since he was given his title. It wasn't appropriate to remove him from his position so soon. But when the Leviathan unit thought about how Stephen had ignored their orders and let Vindictus escape, he became a sinner in their eyes. Therefore, they couldn't sit still any longer. They agreed that this was a dereliction of duty, and Stephen was no longer qualified to be the sovereign. "He's too immature to be the sovereign. He's acting out just because we sent the erudites' students to carry out the operation instead of him. A true leader should know how to keep his emotions in check. If we continue to let him be the sovereign, he'll stir up an even bigger mess for us in the future."
There's someone else who's more qualified to take on the sovereign's responsibilities anyway. The majority decision was clear, so the leader made up his mind. We're in agreement. So this matter is decided. Removing Stephen from his position will have to wait until after the erudites' students take care of Vito. It'll be an outstanding merit that'll win the people's support. We'll take that opportunity and replace Stephen with the students as the sovereign. I believe that'll be what the people want. His words received unanimous agreement from the rest of the Leviathan unit. All they needed to do was sit tight and wait for the good news. They even started preparing for the celebratory banquet. Meanwhile, the erudites' students and the vanguard had made it to Annapolis's military base. Let them enter the base, Vito instructed his subordinates. Then, close the gate and slaughter them all. Oblivious to the disaster awaiting them, Kenny gave his orders to the vanguard. Vito's inside. Kill him on sight and become meritorious officials of the country. Ever since the erudites' students established the vanguard's value, their determination had risen. They were motivated even though they were being used to break through the gate. But when they charged, they were surprised that the gate wasn't locked. They rushed in, but no one was in sight. Marshall and the other three followed them inside. They were just as dumbfounded as their team. That was too easy. Vito and his subordinates hadn't even defended the gate. Maybe they heard about the erudites' students and ran away, someone said. Everyone knows they have a technique to suppress Vito. Even he's afraid of death. That has to be it, someone else chimed in. Marshall and the other three assumed Victor's attitude. Their expressions were filled with pride. Vito was afraid of them, and he'd fled before they arrived. Marshall shouted in the distance. Vito, I know you haven't gotten far. If you know what's good for you, you'd better surrender. With us four around, there's no place for you in this country. Vito was actually still at the military base. He was at the highest point, watching all of this in mild amusement. He told his subordinates to close the gate. Marshall and the others were startled when the gate slammed shut behind them. Armed assassins and mercenaries emerged from behind the building. The vanguard was originally full of confidence. They now had an ominous feeling that maybe following the erudites' students wasn't the wisest choice. On the other hand, Marshall and the other three were fearless, even though they'd been ambushed. Vito had been locked up for over 100 years. They were certain that he'd gotten weaker. Since when did the famed erudite, Vito, resort to these kind of underhanded tactics? Marshall provoked. Is he afraid of us? Once upon a time, he roamed freely among hundreds of thousands of troops alone, Colton said. But the four of us were enough to scare him off. If you're not a coward, then show yourself, Kenny demanded. If we're in a good mood, maybe we'll consider sparing you. While they were chattering, a tall young man appeared on top of the wall. You four are naive and ignorant. Vito's chilling gaze swept over the vanguard. A tremendous pressure bore down on them. Unlike them, Marshall and the other three weren't affected. Is that all you got? I'm disappointed. Vito stared down at them with an indifferent expression. Are you for the so-called unyielding erudites? Are you looking down on us? Marshall asked angrily. Vito ignored him. Where are those four geezers? They didn't want to come with you. Are they afraid? Is that why they sent their students here to die in their place? How dare you slander our teachers? Marshall snapped. You lost to them all those years ago. Vito laughed. I lost? Get your facts straight. They joined forces and tried to take me down with hundreds of thousands of troops, but in the end, they only managed to restrain me. Is that something to brag about? Colton, Gilbert, and Kenny shared awkward glances. The entire world knew about Vito's battle with the U.S. back then. As Vito had said, the process that led up to his capture wasn't an honorable one. A true victor doesn't care about the minor details, Marshall retorted. You caused so much bloodshed back then. Who are you to talk about principles? Regardless of what happened, you were captured, and that is a fact. The other three students regained their pride. You were captured alive back then, but this time we'll finish you off, Kenny threatened. Vito chuckled. You want to kill me? You sound confident.
Your martial arts aren't invincible, Marshall said. No one understands you better than us, Kenny bragged. Even you might not understand your martial arts as well as we do. Vito was genuinely surprised by their bold remarks. It seemed like Vindictus hadn't lied. The other 4 erudites had devoted their lives to researching and designing a technique to kill him. Is that so? I believe you. I heard you've perfected a technique those 4 geezers designed. Marshall snorted. It's good that you know. We mastered it a long time ago. It's like a part of us now. This technique will be the end of you. Vito smiled in amusement, while his subordinates snickered. Marshall and the other 3 couldn't understand why they were laughing. When the laughter didn't stop, they felt somewhat flustered. They tensed and instinctively tightened their grip on their weapons. The vanguard was getting restless from the pressure in the air and the nonchalant attitude of their enemy. Kenny stepped in when he saw that their morale was shaken. There's nothing to be afraid of. Those who pretend to be mysterious are all bark but no bite. Follow my lead. Kenny was the first to charge towards Vito's subordinates. Marshall, Colton, and Gilbert followed close behind. Seeing that the erudites' students were taking the lead, the vanguard rushed forward.